Hey, Nick, how are you doing today?
I am outstanding. How are you doing, Amy?
I live in this weird kind of quantum state in life right now where one minute I could be completely happy writing an article, doing DIY, whatever. And the next minute I'm like, oh, that's right. We went to war with yet another country. So what we're going to talk about today, Nick?
Well, and according to Lindsey Graham's pulling a page out of the Russian playbook and said, I'm not sure it's a technical definition of war, so it might be a special military operation. We'll see where this goes when Congress finally makes it back in town.
Yes, and so let's talk about what's happening in the meantime. So, what, 2 nights ago, just about 36 hours ago, this kind of incident started. We've got the map of Iran here, and let's talk a little bit about what got us here. I think you want to go back to the 50s, right?
Yeah, so I'm going to start way back. Everybody knows the 79 revolution that overthrew the Shah, but I want to kind of set the stage for that. Iran had a popularly elected prime minister, Mossadegh, who was instigating a whole lot of reforms to try to modernize Iran and try to bring it up to par with contemporary society. And part of that was going to be nationalizing the oil fields that were largely owned by Britain. So Britain didn't like that, and in the Cold War context, the Eisenhower administration didn't like that, and they launched an operation to depose him and effectively let the Shah become an autocrat, become an absolute dictator, or absolute monarch, rather. He ruled that way for a couple of decades and became a very, very oppressive ruler, but he was on our side, so we didn't really care until 1979 when he was overthrown what was initially a very liberal revolution led by Iranian students, and then it was co-opted by the current clerical regime, and which instituted a theocracy. And then that theocracy has in turn been far more oppressive than the Shah ever was. But that 79, the overthrow, and then the 79 revolution, and then the subsequent decade of war with Iraq, in which we very, very overtly backed Iraq against Iran, although we did under the table supply weapons to Iran as well. So there you go. Has created the whole death to America thing. They see us as the great Satan, and that's really why they see us as who they can continually chant the United States is the root of all evil from their perspective. Fast forwarding until the last few years, we had worked out under the Obama administration. They had started building a nuclear program under the Obama administration. We signed the JCPOA. Please don't ask me to spell it out because I do not remember what that acronym stands for. But it basically capped their nuclear program to very limited civilian use, and they were actually keeping that until the Trump administration backed away from that agreement in 2017, if memory serves. So Iran was like, well, if you guys aren't going to uphold your end of the bargain, neither are we. They started enriching uranium to very near weapons grade quality, which of course got a lot of players in the Middle East nervous. Saudi Arabia was not a fan of that. Israel was certainly not a fan of that, and we are not a fan of that because of the impact it has on our allies in the region. So during the course of Israel's war over the last couple of years, Israel attacked Iran directly, and we participated in part of that. And then last summer, we obliterated their nuclear program. But then it wasn't obliterated enough, so we started negotiations for them to cease and desist. Those negotiations, from everything that I understand, were not approached in good faith on our part. Our part was effectively an ultimatum: give up your weapons program, and stop supporting your proxies throughout the region, and we won't bomb you. That sounds like extortion to me, but I guess the Trump administration considers that a negotiating position. So we pushed that and pushed that and pushed that, and Iran is like, well, we're actually negotiating. So if you want us to give up something, you need to give us something, and we were unwilling to do that. The Trump administration decided they'd had enough and launched the bombing campaign yesterday. The stated objectives are sort of ambiguous and sort of not. Trump has talked about getting rid of the nuclear program. He's also talked about regime change. I don't think either one of those objectives are going to be effectively accomplished through a strictly air campaign. but there's not been a buildup of ground forces in the region, which would result in an ensuing ground campaign. Right now, from my perspective, what this is going to be is it's going to really wreck the ruling structure and the infrastructure around Iran, which is going to make it really hard to rule and to build up any sort of cohesive infrastructure and any sort of cohesive defense structure, which is good for our allies in the region, but is not necessarily good for the Iranians.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what's going on around Iran. So I think one of the things that did surprise some people was the amount of attacks that they had outside Iran and to different countries all around the area.
Yeah, so they targeted, they did strike into Israel, and there have been fatalities in Israel. And they have struck at bases or at countries and at U.S. bases in the region and countries that are hosting U.S. bases. So you've seen strikes in Bahrain, UAE, Qatar, Israel. I think I said something about strikes in Jordan. There are reported U.S. fatalities now. I think I read this morning 3 dead and 5 seriously injured. I don't know exactly where that happened, but it's in any one or a combination of a number of places. The threat is they've threatened and actually struck a couple of ships traveling through the Straits of Hormuz, which is going to have a pretty broad economic impact. You're going to start seeing oil prices spike as the oil markets get really, really nervous here. About 10% of global oil travels through that strait. So if you and being a global market, any disruption to global supply is going to cause global price increases.
Quick shout out to Google Maps. Thanks a lot for letting us use your product for this. When we looked at, a lot of times we like to, take different photos, but there's just so much going on in the world, and we wanted to be able to kind of highlight some of these smaller areas like the Straits, Qatar, which I believe was hit, as well as Bahrain. The UAE was hit, and then I think one of the properties in Dubai was actually hit, or fragments hit it as well. I think it was one of the 7-star hotels there. So yeah, lots of activity. I think that surprised some of the neighbors of this fallout. Yeah,
the collateral damage. I mean, our bases, the one in UAE is pretty close to the city. So if they've been aiming for our base there, it could have very easily hit Abu Dhabi, although Dubai is not that close.
Well, it was my understanding Dubai was trying to hit particularly one of Trump's holdings.
That's entirely possible. I hadn't heard or seen that, but that does not surprise me.
Well, and this goes into everything is keeping up with the current events as they happen, which is why we're having cocktails and current events. Let's broaden out, though, and let's talk about, now that we've talked a little bit about the oil and gas impact, how is it going to impact Russia and China that are both big proxies and
yeah, so I'm gonna
kind of friendly-ish with the Iranian regime that is currently in place.
I'm gonna start up in Russia with their ongoing war in Ukraine. Russia had been getting supplied a lot of drones from Iran. I understand Russia has taken over much of the production using Iranian design, so the Iranian production may not be as much of an impact to them. But the expenditure of U.S. munitions across the region is going to be less munitions that can be purchased by the EU and supplied to Ukraine. And that's the particularly important ones are the air defense, the Patriot batteries. If we're hoarding them all because we need them, we legitimately need them for our own defense, then we're not going to be able to sell them and provide them to Ukraine for their defense. That's the biggest impact I see up there. Is it's just going to take attention away from Ukraine, and it's going to take potential material away from Ukraine.
And I do want to highlight, Nick, while we're up there, is that the Scandic countries have put a no-fly zone for Netanyahu and said that if he does fly into those spaces, that he would be arrested if possible. And so they do have that out as well.
Yeah, and that predates this. So he was indicted by the ICC, the International Criminal Court, back during the campaign that they've been launching in Gaza the last couple of years. I don't have all the details in that, so I can't speak to it in great detail. But I would imagine any country that adheres to the ICC closely is going to prevent much travel from Netanyahu.
Okay, let's move over to China.
China. So China, this is from their perspective. Okay, they lose a source of cheap oil, at least in the short term, but it takes a lot of U.S. attention away from the South China Sea and the East China Sea. So the 2 months that are most optimal for an amphibious landing on Taiwan are April and November. I'm not saying that China is going to launch an invasion of Taiwan next month. We have not seen any sort of buildup of amphibious forces and ground forces that would suggest that that's imminent. But if we've got 2 carrier strike groups in the Gulf, that's 2 carrier strike groups that aren't in the South China Sea trying to ward off China. It's also drawing away those same air defense systems that would be used in the Philippines potentially, by Japan potentially, to safeguard our forces in the Middle East. So again, it's from China's perspective, anything that distracts our attention, that takes our attention out of East Asia, is a good thing, and they will just make up their energy consumption requirements from somewhere else.
Great. So we're going to ignore Somalia, Nigeria, other places that we've had little attacks on, and we're going to go back over here into the USA. As you know, I'm obsessed with Puerto Rico and with some of the stuff going on here, just kind of in our own backyard. Once again, you nailed it last time. Cuba, once again, cut off all their oil. They were really struggling. And now Marco Rubio has come out to the public saying what they want is regime change. Anything you want us to add to that?
Yeah, and that's not a really big shocker. It's been U.S. policy that we wanted the regime taken out since it was first installed in the 50s. And it certainly inspired, I think, this group of 10 almost certainly lone wolf nut jobs to try to go and start their own revolution this last week. It might inspire some other Cuban expats to try to make that same journey and try to foment some sort of rebellion on the island. But anything short of a massive U.S. outlay of support and material is not going to really lead to anything. Okay, you're choking them off of oil, but they'll survive. I mean, you see, North Korea has been choked off of just about everything, and that regime is doing just fine. Cuba will find a way to carry on. And it'll just suck to breathe the average Cuban, but it's not going to force the regime to back away.
And then we have Venezuela that we've also trying to force regime change, and then of course the oil proceeds are going to a bank in Qatar in Trump's name.
So my perspective on Venezuela, it's been more of a regime co-opting than a regime change. We took out the guy on top, but the regime has not changed. There were still blowing up drug boats in the Caribbean, so it clearly was never about drugs. Every one of Maduro's people are still in place. They're still grafting the same way they were before. They're just saying enough lip service to Washington to say, okay, we'll let you sell oil, but you have to do it through us so we can take our cut. It's maybe at some point in the future, we'll try to push some sort of actual elections, but I don't see that happening anytime in the near future. So it's not regime change in any meaningful sense. And if I may,
and then of course we've got threats to Mexico cartel operations, continued threats into Canada, and then the Olympics really highlighted friction with Europe, Greenland in particular, and no new threats on those though for the past week or so. So that's
unfortunately.
Okay, Nick, this has been a really good sort of around the world deep dive into Iran. Anything you want to add before?
Yeah, I do. Before we sign off, I want to. What's going to happen next in Iran is kind of the real important question. Since we've killed the Ayatollah, even Iran has come out and said that he's dead. He kind of saw this coming and said, if something happens to me, these guys are in charge until a successor can be chosen. Those guys may be dead too. I don't know. But the most likely scenarios here are either the theocracy is reconstituted after this bombing subsides, or the IRGC steps up and just creates a military dictatorship, or it fragments into some sort of sectarian violence. Iran is mostly Persian ethnically, but they have significant minorities of Kurds in the northeast and northwest rather, and Azeris in the northwest that are Azerbaijani. That could very easily agitate for regional autonomy. The Turks would certainly not be happy with a autonomous Kurdish region up there. They're also grouping them down in the southeast that has been actively trying to push for an actual independent state, both in Iran and Pakistan, for quite some time now. So you could see a fracture into some sort of internal civil war, just destabilizing Iran itself and potentially its neighbors with an exodus of refugees that we've seen from Syria, from Ukraine, from Libya. So if they're going for regime change, the most likely parallel is Libya. You cut off the head, and it just kind of devolves into infighting and doesn't really help anybody.
Yeah, and good point. You touched on Pakistan, and of course, Pakistan and Afghanistan are having open warfare along their borders right now as well. So much going on, and Pakistan is a nuclear power at this point. So just want to highlight that for everyone. So that's what we've got for current events and cocktails. And so if you're wondering how to handle your current events, what cocktail do you have today, Nick?
I have a maple old fashioned today. I needed a strong one. I've got a double going.
I like that kind of little nod to our neighbors up in Canada and kind of sending them some love. I have a lot of Canadian relatives being from the north, and I appreciate their patience with us, and hopefully we can come to a better point with many of our allies and neighbors and set some of these things to a little bit more back to a summering level. So hopefully when we come back next week and talk to everybody, we can have some better news for you. But just remember, if you can't handle the current events, it's time for some cocktails.